getting you to think a little bit about that you do have a lot of control on your microbiome because of how you choose to eat and your general lifestyle. But probably diet is one of the biggest impacts that you can have on your gut microbiome. So this was a paper looking at several different types of diets. Some of these I'm sure you've heard about already. They're pretty common out there. And the Western diet is there as well, or the SAD diet, standard American diet. And then you can see what they're trying to compare, like what's going on with the microbiome. So you look at diversity here, and they say, for example, the Mediterranean diet has an increase in diversity and stability. The jury is still out on the vegan idea. You can see they're still questioning that. They have to do more studies. Western diet, you see a decrease in diversity, and something else is going on there. What do you think they're trying to get you to think about right here? What does it look like is happening there? Yeah. So some microbes feed off the mucus layer just naturally, and that's okay. But it's like, how much is that going on? And so if you get an imbalance, you get too much of that going on. And you can see that they're pretty much eating through the mucus and creating not much of a barrier anymore. And then they're trying to show that some of the cells are getting through. And then you see, I don't know if you can read it from where you're sitting, but the pro-inflammatory idea that it does increase inflammation. Whereas the Mediterranean diet, on the other hand, right next to it, they're saying anti-inflammatory. The mucus layer is still there. You're seeing the short chain fatty acids being produced. I know that quite a few people are do the ketogenic diet, but after I've done some readings on that and what it does to your physiology and your microbiome, I'm not a fan myself, but I know that some people have lost weight with that, but I don't think that's something you'd want to do long term. And at least according to this study, they're showing that it can have the issue of decreasing diversity and causing that mucus layer decrease as well. So it's always a good idea to look into that before you start to devote yourself to a certain way of eating. When I was listening to some scientists being interviewed, and at the end of the interview, they asked, he's one of the leading scientists in the microbiome and the diet. And he said, if you had to give one piece of advice to the people, just living their lives and eating their foods, what would you say would be one of the biggest things they could do to improve their overall health and their microbiome health? And he said, by far, increase your fiber. He said that would do a world of good for your microbiome. And he was talking to Americans because he said, when we follow the standard American diet, we don't get nearly enough fiber in our diet. And it's not really, he wasn't thinking to keep you from not being constipated. That wasn't his thought. His thought is when you eat fibers, especially a diversity of fiber, you're feeding your good microbes in your gut. And they love that kind of food. And they really can ferment that well, and then they produce the short chain fatty acids, and which are good for you. And so he said that's probably the easiest thing that we can do to increase our overall health and the gut microbiome. I know a lot of people are on, oh, you got to get protein, but there's some nice studies out there showing you don't need as much protein as you think. And then here, from that paper, it says the consumption of fiber is inversely related to premature death. So that means more fiber, less premature death from all causes of disease that they studied. And so they're saying this is a pretty blanket way of increasing your overall health with regard to all kinds of different diseases, getting enough fiber in your diet. So think about that. You have a lot of choices. And for me, that makes it very hopeful that you have a lot more control on your overall health than I think is often believed by people who don't have this information. So you do have a lot more control on that than you think. And here's a more graphic in your face visual. This is pretty extreme, but they're saying every bite you take is either fighting disease or feeding it. And I think, that's extreme ends of this viewpoint. And I think, there is a gray area in there, but it is something to think about. So when you eat, give a little thought to your microbes. What would make them happy when you're eating? And make sure you're being kind to your microbes. Okay, so a few other things I wanted to say about the human microbe is on the next slide set, which should be posted. And I just wanted to say a few things regarding some of the really cool studies they're finding with how the gut microbiome is influencing your whole body, not just what's going on in your gut. And so they're looking at, when microbes are doing their thing in the gut and they're eating the food that you eat, and then they're excreting out waste products, what's going on with those waste products? Where do they go? How do they impact more than just your gut physiology? And so here they're looking at how it might impact your mind and your emotions. And one thing that they were finding out, well, I think they've known this for quite a long time. If you've taken animal or human phys, you probably know that the gut is the biggest immune organ of your body. That's where most of your immune system is, and the endocrine organ. And it also has a nervous system called the enteric nervous system. And so it is thought, now that they know so much more about the gut microbiome, they're saying that you have not only digestion going on, the microbes are helping with that, but they're also influencing the immune system and endocrine functions and neurotransmission. So if you've taken any neuroscience classes, or maybe they talk a little bit about in phys, you have these neurotransmitters that will function in your brain. But really, they're starting to call this the gut microbiome. They're actually saying it's like a gut brain. They say, and it can work without instructions from the brain. It's very autonomous in that regard. And so you may often see it referred to as the gut brain. And what they're finding is, yes, it can certainly do all the local stuff of digestion and influencing your epithelial cells of your intestinal tract and so on. But it's also far reaching in that they're seeing links between what's going on with your microbes in your gut and your behavior, your learning ability. And it is something that they're really starting to look into more closely to understand this better. This is just a schematic. I'm not going to get into the details here, but this is just trying to show the connection between the gut, which they're showing down here, and then you have your the epithelial cells of the gut, and then they're showing up into the brain, and you have the vagus nerve. You might have heard of that already. The vagus nerve is connecting. And so they're trying to figure this out, like how are the microbes influencing the brain when they're in the gut? And this is something that has led to a lot of interesting research, and it's still, they don't have a complete story yet. But they're trying to show here that you have a variety of the immune system cells are getting activated, you're seeing here, and the nerve, the nerve system certainly can connect from the vagus nerve up. when they look at neurotransmitters, so the bacteria in your gut, they know now can produce either neurotransmitters, like full-on neurotransmitters that your brain uses, or the precursors to that. And they're trying to figure that out because, you probably know about the blood-brain barrier, that really does prevent a lot of things from passing into the brain. And so they're trying to figure out how, it doesn't seem like full-on mature neurotransmitters that are produced by the gut bacteria. They don't think those make it past the blood-brain barrier because they're too big and they're just not making it. So that's the current thought. What they see could be happening are the next two panels here, where they're saying maybe the vagus nerve is sending the signal where it's really, yes, the bacteria are releasing neurotransmitters and it is signaling the vagus nerve, which then takes that signal all the way to the brain. So that's a common hypothesis that's out there. And then the other idea is the last one, where they're saying, we know this has been established. They know that bacteria in the gut produce neurotransmitters, precursors to neurotransmitters. They're saying some of these precursors are small enough where they could get past the blood-brain barrier. And so the middle and right panel are some of the hypotheses that they're trying to track down now. And so they're realizing that, and of course it depends on the composition of your gut microbiome, what kinds of neurotransmitters are being produced, how much are being produced, or the precursors, for example. But a lot of the studies that have come out so far are showing that like learning behavior, cognitive functions, including your learning capacity and your memory ability, are influenced by the gut microbiome. And that they've done some studies in mouse and rat models where they mess with the microbiome. The easiest way to do that is through antibiotic or use a germ-free mice. And they can show that the working memory, spatial memory of the mouse was altered when they were provided with antibiotics, and reversing that, putting in some probiotics into the mouse and then working them through those same tests showed an improvement in memory. They're showing your mood and emotion seem to be affected. Some of these studies are done in mouse and rat, and some with humans as well. And then looking at influences of probiotics, prebiotics, and then fermented foods. Again, some of these studies, they've done both human and mice studies on that too. So they're starting to get into not just working with mice on this. And so they're starting to think a little bit more carefully about some of the brain functions and saying, maybe the microbes are playing more of a role than we thought, and we should be looking at that. They're excited because if there is a link that they can discover and then manipulate by manipulating the microbiome, that would be a fairly straightforward way to provide therapy to people depending on what it is they're looking at. And so this idea that influencing the gut microbiome, it could be a good therapy target. They've even looked at depression. They took Transferring the Blues is the name of the paper. Depression-associated gut microbiota induces neurobehavioral changes in the rat. And so this was a human rat study where they took and did a fecal transplant from humans that were diagnosed with depression and put it into rats that were germ-free and looked to see what would happen. And I don't do rat research, so I'm not quite sure how they determined the rat was depressed. But apparently they have a method that's publishable and, verifiable by scientists who do this kind of thing. And they said that the study did demonstrate that the rats were depressed. I'm not quite sure how that works, but so they took the fecal transplant from depressed patients, and they could see both behavioral and physiological shifts going on. Anhedonia is just like a lack of interest. It's a fancy word to say a lack of interest in normal things that you're interested in. anxiety-like behaviors. And then they were physiologically, they were looking at tryptophan metabolism because that's linked into anxiety and depression. So anyways, they're looking at this idea that, that the studies are showing, at least with this rat study and many others are supporting this, that you can see a difference with certain microbiome. And so, of course, that leads them to think we should be able to reverse that if we can just understand this better and then provide different microbes to the people who are feeling depressed or anxious. And that should really help or reduce symptoms. So this is an active area of research that is still going on. They have a lot left to learn, but it is something that is, they're pretty confident that there is a link, and they just have a lot more to understand in terms of the nuances of it. But again, here was a nice paper looking at, again, the choices that you make when you eat. That, here they're looking at fermented foods, and that, maybe enriched diets of fermented foods could help with reducing depression and anxiety. So again, going to the idea that something as simple as what you choose to eat could really, really help. And so I think as you go on and live your life, you're going to see in the next decade or two that there'll be quite a bit more on this, and maybe even to the point where you can go to the doctor and they'll be able to prescribe a probiotic of some sort that would help with a particular issue you may be experiencing. So lots of exciting stuff going on. Really interesting to think about when they study the blood of humans, they actually can show that a lot of the metabolites flowing in your blood are actually being produced by the gut microbes. So they know that they strongly influence what's going on with your overall physiology. It's not just what's going on in your gut. And so that brings the idea of this idea, the holobiont, and that we're holobionts. And so this is something that, this is an actual conference that was held in 2021 by the International Symbiosis Society. I've gone to a couple of their meetings. And so it's all devoted to symbiosis between microbes and other animals, including humans, but a lot of non-human subjects too, and including plants. And so this is an idea that's fairly new, and it's being termed the hologenome theory. Does that ring a bell? Have you heard that anywhere? Hologenome theory? It's not really talked about, I don't think, in undergrad evolution classes. I don't think, at least not yet. Primarily, I think because most people who teach those classes are not they have no microbiology training or very little in general. And so this was proposed maybe about 15 years ago now. And the idea that you can't ignore the microbes that coexist with plants and animals, that they're such a strong influence on their host. And so if you just zoom into us, Homo sapiens, we have about 20,500 genes. And if you just take a conservative estimate and say, yeah, let's say there's 2,000 different species that coexist, and each single species would have about 2,500 genes in their genome. And so if you start adding it up, that's 5 million genes being added to you as an entity when you combine you and all your microbes. And so what they're trying to say here is that all these extra genes definitely are impacting what's going on with you, and that they think of this as a unit, that the host and all the microbes. And so they say it should really be considered as a single entity or unit of selection in evolution. And that when you look at the evolutionary process, you need to factor in what are the microbes doing and how they are influencing that process. And the hologenome, that phrase is just looking at all the genes that the host and then the microbiota have all taken together. So if you're going to consider them a unit of selection in evolution, that means that they need to like persist as an entity over time, over generations. And so one of the things that they needed to show to support this idea is that you can get transmission of the microbes from one generation into the next. And they know that that can happen. So vertical transmission, and we've already talked about that. When you were born, immediately you were getting colonized by your mom's microbiota and your parents in general. And they can show that tracks. That's been studied over and over, and all the data is supporting that you have you share your closest similarity of microbes and genes to your family unit compared to people you're not related to. And that's a given now. That's pretty standard information. So they can show that you do get this transmission, vertical transmission from parent to offspring, whether you're a human, another animal, a plant, if you think about the seed idea. And so what is exciting about this is that when you look at the microbiome, you typically have pretty good diversity, and that's good because then it allows you to have flexibility in adapting situations a little quicker when you have all of that to lean on in terms of all these different diverse microbes and their ability to adapt. We know microbes can mutate and adapt so much quicker than animals can, eukaryotic cells. And so they often refer to this as the insurance policy hypothesis, that you have this backup of all these other genes that can help you if you get into a situation where you have to adapt fairly quickly. So they've been able to demonstrate that influence so that, yes, the microbes change faster, their ability to mutate and adapt. And then if you just think about their fast reproductive rate, that the microbial amplification idea where you can get binary fission and doubling of populations within hours. So you get this, it's very flexible and adaptable in that response, in that mechanism. And then we know about horizontal gene transfer already, how you have this idea that microbes are able to gain new novel DNA that they never had before that could be very helpful for the host. And so we've talked about those methods. These are some of them. We've also talked about nanotubes and those types of ideas. And then just living your life, you acquire new symbionts as you go through your day. And some of those persist, some don't. But the upshot is that when you look at, for example, the human, our genome changes very slowly. We have a very slow, takes a long time in terms of generation time for humans when you compare them to microbes. And so we just evolve very, very slowly, long generation times. And really, it's only the sex cells, if you have changes in those, that's the only portion that will get transmitted to the next generation. So we have some it's just a slow process especially when you think about humans. And often you need many genes shifting or coming on or turning off in order to see some kind of observable change. But with the microbes, because they change so rapidly, it does help the host adapt better. And they see this over and over, whether they look at humans. They've done a lot more studies in plants because it's much easier to work on plants and some other non-human animals. And so this idea is gaining credibility. When it was first proposed, of course, it was not credible. A lot of scientists were very miffed about this idea, and they didn't want to really think too hard about it. But there's been enough scientists out there now that are really bringing this up over and over again, and it's gaining some more acceptance now. This is from a paper that was published I think back in 2014. And they're saying, the more we look, the more we realize how bacteria is incredibly diverse and everywhere, they're everywhere. And that, they're directly involved in the evolution of animals. We came into their world as we evolved. Microbes were here first. And they certainly are looking at these ideas, how do they impact each other's genomes? We know that bacteria can influence your gene expression. That's already been shown very nicely. They know that bacteria, especially they've looked at bacteria, how they influence your development as you were growing from the fetus, especially after you're born, they can show how that's impacting you. And so this is something that's gaining in studies, looking at it a little bit more, and they often use the term intertwining genomes. And again, if you think about it, the first protocell was a prokaryotic cell. So essentially, microbes were here first. And it does make sense through the process of evolution that we retained a lot of those genes that the microbes have. So about 37%. And what's interesting is that there are many of those genes they're tracking. Like, what are those genes that we share in common with the prokaryotic cell type? And they're showing a lot of it has to do with communication. So again, this idea of like quorum sensing and this kind of idea between the host and the bacteria. So they're starting to realize that the human genome have a lot of homologous DNA. So this is a pie chart just trying to show that a little bit. So again, this really does kind of bring home the point that we are symbionts for sure. And I think I've already showed this idea. They know that within your gut, especially, so those bacteria that hang out with you, they just have a really good ability to do horizontal gene transfer. They're just really good at it. And so again, this is looking at the idea of how adaptable and flexible they are. And, when you think about human evolution, often they don't think about the microbes that come with the host, but the microbiologists who study evolution, they're saying, we came into their world. When we evolved and our species arose, we were immersed in a microbial world. So you cannot deny that that's impacting evolution and speciation. And so they're really starting to think about this more clearly. And so lots of studies have been done. And so this is from a more popular journal paper where they're showing again that they're starting to use the word that, we are a superorganism or a holobiont. So you may see that term showing up more and more over time here. But the microbiologists are definitely excited about this idea, and the word is getting out. So this is from that same paper, and they're just showing in that paper, they're talking about like the diversity in the human. And they're saying, yes, you have some species that, are at a very high population, but then you have other species with you that are occupying, they say, the long tail of distribution. So that just means they're smaller population sizes. But they're, again, making the point that just because there's a small amount of them doesn't mean that they're irrelevant. And so they are making the point that some of the rare species that are part of the human microbiome may be very important. We just don't there's still a lot of research that needs to be done. Kind of, and they often use the link of, or the analogy of a keystone species like the wolf. You know, even though wolves have a very low population in a certain ecosystem, they have a very strong impact on that, on the ecology and the ecosystem. So they use that analogy when they think about rare species that coexist with their hosts, that they can be still very important. So they're looking at those ideas. Okay, so as I was looking for some papers, I stumbled on some fun stuff. So have you ever seen these stuffed animals? So they are microbes and they're plush. I think they call them plush microbes. I think that's the company or the product term. And so they will come with a little tag explaining what microbe they are. So like this red one here, I have that one in my office. That's Helicobacter pylori that causes ulcers. And so it comes with a little tag of the species name, and then they describe what it is and what it's famous for. And this one, they're not showing, they even have viruses. I don't see any viruses there, but there's all kinds of different microbes. And then some books being published. Again, this human superorganism idea. I Contain Multitudes. I've read that one. That's a very good book. Very, I don't know if you've ever seen Ed Young give some TED Talk, let's see, TED Talks, YouTube. I've seen him on there. He's a science journalist. And so his books are nice because he doesn't use a bunch of jargon. He writes for people who don't have a ton of science. And then again, we've seen this idea, beautiful Petri plates with microbes. Can you tell what that Petri plate's trying to depict? The art on there? What does that look like to you? Looks like neurons to me. I don't know. Does it look like that to anybody else? Neurons? This is mine. One of my former grad students gave that to me because she learned what I was trying to get across to her when she took this class, that most microbes, they're your friends. They're good for you. But there's all kinds of stuff. I was shocked to see how much is out there for like just to buy t-shirts with interesting, funny little sayings with microbes. So this is fairly new. I enjoy the little things in life. There's a lot on my plate right now. I think you can all relate to that one. I have a million invisible friends. Yes. So yeah, very fun. You cannot be serious. I thought it was clever. Microbiology is my jam. Introverted, but willing to discuss microbiology. So yeah, some very funny. Can anyone relate to that one? And then these are soaps, hand soaps. You can put by your bathroom sink, put that in your guest bedroom or bathroom, see what they have to say about that. Keychain, plant pots in the shape of viruses, earrings, coasters. These are coasters you can buy and put out for people who have you're entertaining, put their drink on. Socks and scarves. So yeah, I was stunned at how much is out there now. Of course, the world of Etsy, I think a lot of this I found on Etsy when I was taking a break from stuff, and I was shocked. I was pleasantly surprised though. Like finally, microbes are getting some good coverage, some good advertising. So anyways, all right. So be kind to your microbes. Anybody think about microbes as you're eating your Thanksgiving dinner? All right. Well, I don't, let's see. Is the bioremediation in there? In EduCat? I don't know that it is. Let me get that posted in there. Whoops. Hmm. Okay, it should be visible now if you refresh. All right. So, huh, that's weird. Why is it doing that? Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's why. Maybe? No. Okay, let's try this. Okay. So, this bioremediation topic is going to be just an introduction. There's a lot to this topic. So, I'm going to give you a taste of some of the ideas. So now in this day and age, there's a lot of different terms that get at the idea of how to clean up toxic areas. Bioremediation is definitely the oldest term. It was the first term to be coined. And when they look at that term, if someone says that term, what they're probably thinking about is the use of microbes for cleaning up toxic areas. Now they've come up with other terms because now they know like plants can also do that too. So there's different terms for that, and I'll mention that. So I'm covering this a little bit in Plant Phys too, but you're going to see that it's slightly different angle compared to what we talk about in Plant Phys. So traditionally, when you say bioremediation, it's microbes. And I think by now, yeah, at the end of the semester, I think you've gotten the point that microbes are incredibly diverse in their ability to, where they live, what types are found in these different polluted sites, their ability to adapt very quickly to those toxic areas. And so it makes sense that when people were thinking about, how do we clean up all these toxins in our environment, that the microbiologists said, hey, turn to microbes because they can pretty much break down anything. And it's relatively inexpensive because they're easy to grow. It's much easier to work with microbes, for example, than plants, although plants can be very effective. You can do on-site processing in the sense that, let's say there's pollutants in a soil system. Well, there's plenty of microbes in that soil system. So chances are you can just look at that site, try to figure out what microbes are there, and see if you can increase the pollutant breakdown process. Ideally, if you are designing some kind of bioremediation effort, you want that pollutant to be broken down all the way to, when they say that, they usually mean all the way to water or carbon dioxide. If it's partially broken down, then you got to worry about is the partial broke down product also dangerous or more dangerous than the original. And so there's a lot of chemistry involved in this process. It's a very interdisciplinary effort. Certainly you need microbiologists, but you need chemists. You need, if it's a soil system, you need people that are well versed in soil systems. And so there's a lot to it. They definitely have found out that it doesn't always work for all pollutants in the sense, at least in the sense of getting the humans to get the microbes to do it the way they want. I think microbes can do pretty much anything in terms of breaking down pollutants, but sometimes it doesn't work well enough for being able to reuse that site, let's say. Sometimes you go into a contaminated site and you may find that the microbes, it was such, for example, it was such a massive contamination, like a huge influx of contaminants that a lot of the microbes died off. And then when you go into that site, you're like, there's just not much there to work with. And then they have to come up with ideas of maybe spiking in microbes or spiking in nutrients to augment certain microbes to grow back into that site. So this is a flow chart looking at different ways to approach this idea. So in situ, that phrase means that you go to the actual site and work with it there. And you can see when they say engineered, that means that the humans are messing with the system in some way. They're augmenting it or messing with it to try to improve and break down. Intrinsic, if you see that word, what they're saying is they're kind of letting the microbes that are there already just do their thing. And so it's intrinsic to the system in like if it's a soil system. And then ex situ, there's a couple of things to think about there. Sometimes they'll take contaminated soil, for example, they'll scrape up the soil and they'll take it away to a factory that works with remediating that soil, and then they'll bring it back and dump it back out. That you can imagine is a little bit more expensive. That's a lot more labor costs, and you have to have a facility that can deal with that. There's also another method that they call land farming, which I'll talk about, where again, they remove the soil and take it somewhere, but it's not always to a factory. So here they're comparing, what happens if you do remediation right at the polluted site versus taking it to somewhere. In this case, they're saying, let's take it to a building where they can use a bioreactor of some sort and add the contaminated soil or something into that and have the microbes that are in their bioreactor work on it. And so on the other hand, if you have in situ, that means you're right there at the site of contamination. Yeah, if you take your soil away, let's say, and take it to a bioreactor, certainly you do have more control on it because it's, bioreactors have a lot of control systems on it. So you can definitely control what's going on. You definitely have that compared to if you just rely on what's happening naturally in that soil system at the site. And definitely you have some different obstacles. Comparing if you have in situ or ex situ. But basically, no matter which process you're picking, ideally, you do want it to go to a full breakdown. And that, no matter which way you do it, you're still wondering, how clean is clean. And of course, it depends what you want to do with that site. Do you want to build an apartment complex on it? Or are you using it for a dump site? So it really does matter what that land is hoped to be used for once it gets remediated. So here is a table with different types of contaminants. You have organic, these are all organic. And there's different classes. In the notes section, I have what some of these abbreviations mean. You don't need to know that, but if you're curious, you can look at what some of these abbreviations mean. So you can see that from the microbial perspective, it's not really a contaminant to them in the sense that most of these contaminants that can make us very, very sick, they're mutagens, carcinogens, microbes use them as a nutrient. So they're using them as a carbon and electron source. So from their perspective, it's just something that they can use for their own nutrition. And as they're breaking that down, of course, that leads to breakdown products. Hopefully, you want it all the way broken down to CO2. But it depends. You can see some of the chemical classes, they're saying, yeah, so far we see sometimes they're broken down, but sometimes it's only partial. And again, that could be just lack of, they haven't discovered the right microbe yet. I mean, there's a lot of different microbes out there. So, and then the other thing I wanted to point out, and I'll point this out again when we meet next, but this idea of how are the microbes breaking it down? Are they doing it in the presence of oxygen or the absence of oxygen? And they're finding that can make a big difference on how far they break down these products. And so knowing that information that is important, because when you design a strategy, very often you'll purposely create like anaerobic conditions first, and then you'll purposely switch over to aerobic. And then when they do that, they can show a more complete breakdown. So having that knowledge of the microbe is very important. Okay, well, we got to stop there. So Wednesday and Thursday, we'll continue on with this, and then Thursday we'll talk about the final exam.